GeForce 256. In August 1999, Nvidia did something so audacious that competitors thought it was a joke. They invented a term that didn't exist and slapped it on a graphics card. GPU, Graphics Processing Unit. Before this, nobody called anything a GPU because the concept didn't exist as a separate category. Your CPU handled everything. Rendering, transformations, lighting calculations, all of it grinding away on your Pentium III while your games ran like slideshows. The GeForce 256 changed that with hardware T and L. Transform and lighting acceleration built directly into the card. It cost between $279 and $399 depending on the model. And reviewers looked at the GPU branding like Nvidia's marketing team had lost their minds. 3DFX was dominating with Voodoo cards. ATI had the Rage series. And here's Nvidia inventing terminology for something that technically already existed. Except it didn't. Not like this. Not with dedicated hardware doing what CPUs struggled with. The GeForce 256 had 23 million transistors dedicated to making your CPU stop sweating. Within 2 years, everyone called them GPUs. The term Nvidia invented became the industry standard. But naming something doesn't make you dominant. You need to prove it. And Nvidia's next move would crush the competition so hard they'd never recover. GeForce 8800 GTX, November 8th, 2006. The day Nvidia launched the first unified shader architecture and accidentally created a meme that would haunt PC gaming for a decade. 681 million transistors. 128 shader processors that could handle any task dynamically instead of being locked into fixed pipelines. This was the first DirectX 10 card arriving at $599 with performance that made everything before it look prehistoric. ATI's competing cards still used separate pixel and vertex shaders. The 8800 GTX unified them. Then, Crysis launched in November 2007. A game so absurdly demanding that even the 8800 GTX struggled to run it at maximum settings. Can it run Crysis? Became the benchmark question. Not because Crysis was particularly good, it was fine, but because nothing could run it. The game was more famous for melting hardware than for its gameplay. Here's the thing nobody talks about. That unified shader architecture Nvidia built for gaming, it became the foundation for GPGPU computing. General purpose processing on graphics cards. The 8800 GTX could suddenly do more than render polygons. It could run calculations, scientific simulations, data processing. This architecture didn't just change gaming. It accidentally built the foundation for AI. But we're not there yet. First, Nvidia had to make graphics cards people could actually afford. GTX 1080. May 27th, 2016. The same month Oculus Rift started shipping to consumers. Coincidence? Absolutely not. Nvidia's first Pascal architecture card arrived with 2,560 CUDA cores built on a 16 nanometer FinFET process. The efficiency jump was massive, 10 times the performance of that 8800 GTX from a decade earlier at the exact same $599 price point. But the marketing push wasn't about raw power. It was about 2 words: VR ready. Virtual reality was supposed to be the future. The Oculus Rift cost $800. The HTC Vive cost $799. You needed a GTX 1080 to drive them properly. Nvidia positioned this card as the gateway to immersive experiences that would revolutionize gaming forever. Everyone bought it for VR. Everyone used it for regular gaming. Turns out strapping a screen to your face and stumbling around your living room while nauseous wasn't the revolution Facebook promised. The headsets gathered dust. The GTX 1080S kept rendering Overwatch at buttery frame rates. The card succeeded. VR didn't. Classic mismatch between marketing hype and consumer reality. But something else was happening in the background. Gamers weren't the only ones buying GTX 1080S. People were running calculations on them. Mining operations were scaling up. Cryptocurrency miners discovered these cards could print money, and they bought every single one. GTX 1060. July 19th, 2016. The most popular graphics card in Steam's hardware survey for years. Not the fastest, not the cheapest, just good enough. 1280 CUDA cores. A $249 MSRP that you could actually pay at launch without fighting bots or scalpers. This card could run everything at 1080p and hit 60 frames per second consistently. Not maxed settings on every game, but high settings on most. The Witcher 3 ran beautifully. Doom crushed it. Battlefield 1 looked gorgeous. This was the sweet spot card. Nvidia proved you didn't need flagship performance to have a great gaming experience. The GTX 1060 outsold the 1070 and 1080 combined. It stayed at the top of Steam's hardware survey from 2016 through 2022. 6 years of dominance from a mid-range card nobody hyped. Flagship cards get the reviews and the YouTube benchmarks. Mid-range cards get the sales. The GTX 1060 defined what budget-conscious gamers would accept as viable for years. $249 for half a decade of relevance. Millions bought this card for gaming. They played their games, got their value, and moved on with their lives. But Nvidia was already planning something that would make gaming feel secondary. Ray tracing was coming, and Nvidia was about to make you pay for a feature that barely worked at launch. RTX 2080 Ti, September 20th, 2018. Nvidia charged $1,199 for a feature that tanked your frame rate by 50%. First generation RT cores for ray tracing. First generation tensor cores for AI processing. 4,352 CUDA cores for traditional rendering. This was the flagship, and Jensen Huang stood on stage in his leather jacket promising real-time ray tracing would change everything. Problem: maybe 5 games supported it at launch. Battlefield 5. Shadow of the Tomb Raider. That's about it. Turn on ray tracing and watch your beautiful $1,199 card struggle to maintain 60 frames per second at 1080p. Reviewers called it the future of gaming. Gamers called it that thing I immediately disable in the settings menu. The memes started instantly. It just works became sarcastic shorthand for overpromised features. Everyone mocked ray tracing as a gimmick Nvidia was forcing on an industry that didn't want it. Too expensive, too demanding, too early. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Nvidia was right. Ray tracing is standard now in 2025. Every major game supports it. The 2080 Ti was just painfully ahead of software optimization. But those tensor cores seemed pointless for gaming. They weren't for gaming. Those tensor cores were built for AI workloads. And in 2020, crypto and AI demand would create a shortage so catastrophic you literally couldn't buy a graphics card at any price. RTX 3080. September 17th, 2020. $699 MSRP. Good luck ever finding one at that price. 8,704 CUDA cores. Second generation RT cores that actually made ray tracing playable. Nvidia announced the best generational performance leap in years, right as the world locked down for a pandemic. Perfect storm incoming. The card sold out in literal seconds, not minutes. Seconds. Bots scraped every online retailer. Scalpers listed them on eBay for $1,500 to $2,000 before they'd even shipped. Cryptocurrency miners bought them by the pallet. Ethereum mining was printing money, and RTX 308s were the most efficient cards for it. Discord servers formed dedicated to stock tracking. Browser extensions auto-refreshed retailer pages. People set phone alarms for rumored drops. Treated GPU launches like Ticketmaster selling Beyoncé tickets. The term paper launch became the ultimate insult. Nvidia announced a card that didn't exist in meaningful quantities for regular consumers. Gamers blamed miners. Miners blamed scalpers. Everyone blamed Nvidia for not producing enough cards or implementing better anti-bot measures. Meanwhile, supply chains collapsed globally. Semiconductor shortages meant even if Nvidia wanted to flood the market, they physically couldn't. Best price to performance ratio in a generation. Nobody could buy it at the advertised price. And then Nvidia stopped pretending these cards were for gamers at all. RTX 4090, October 12th, 2022. Nvidia's consumer flagship costs $1,599, and it's the cheapest way to run AI models locally. 16,384 CUDA cores. 4th generation tensor cores optimized for AI inference. 24 gigabytes of VRAM. That last spec is the critical one, not for gaming, for AI. 6 weeks after the 4090 launched, ChatGPT dropped and changed everything. Suddenly, AI researchers who couldn't afford $30,000. H100 data center cards realized the gaming flagship could run Llama models, Stable Diffusion, and local LLMs. The mask came off. This was an AI card marketed to gamers because actual AI cards were unobtainable. Gamers bought 409s for 4K gaming at maximum settings with ray tracing enabled. Developers bought them to run AI experiments in their bedrooms. Same card, completely different worlds. Reviews focused on frame rates in Cyberpunk 2077. GitHub discussions focused on tokens per second for language models. Nvidia knew exactly what they were doing. The 4090 sits in this weird space between consumer and professional. Too expensive for most gamers. Too cheap and accessible for enterprise AI budgets. It became the hobbyist AI card by default, but this was still technically available if you had the money. The next card wouldn't be. Because when Nvidia realized AI demand was infinite, they did something unprecedented. H100, March 2023. You can't buy this. Your company probably can't either. 80 gigabytes of HBM3 memory, built specifically for AI training and inference at data center scale. Not marketed to consumers, not available in retail. Price tag between $25,000 and $40,000 per card when you can actually get 1. Wait lists stretch 6 to 12 months. Meta ordered 150,000 of them. Microsoft bought hundreds of thousands. Google, Amazon, every tech giant scrambling for allocation. These aren't graphics cards anymore. They're infrastructure. The H100 powers ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, every AI model you've interacted with. Gaming was never the end game. Nvidia's market cap hit $3 trillion in 2024, more valuable than most countries' entire GDP. Jensen Huang isn't running a graphics card company. He's running the pickaxe supplier for the AI gold rush. Gaming division still exists, sure. Legacy business. The real money is enterprise AI. We started with a card that coined the term GPU in 1999. We end with a card that defines the AI era in 2025. Nvidia doesn't make graphics cards anymore. They make the infrastructure running every AI model you've used. Gaming was the warm-up, the proof of concept, the accidental path to dominance in a market that didn't exist when they started. And if you think, that's weird, you're not paying attention.